Hello, 10th grade. Today I'm going to be doing a close read of Between the World and Me. While I'm reading, I want you to keep formative writing task 2 in mind and remember that we are looking for the theme of the vulnerability of Black bodies. So the idea is to be able to trace this theme over the course of the text and explain how Coates is able to refine and expand this theme. So I'm going to be doing a close reading of the middle paragraph of page 48, starting with I would take breaks. So I would take breaks from reading, walk out to the vendors who line the streets, eat lunch on the yard. I would imagine Malcolm, his body bound in a cell, studying the books, trading his human eyes for the power of flight. And I too felt bound by my ignorance, by the questions that I had not yet understood to be more than just means, by my lack of understanding, and by Howard itself. It was still a school, after all. I wanted to pursue things, to know things, but I could not match the means of knowing that came naturally to me with the expectations of professors. The pursuit of knowing was freedom to me, the right to declare your own curiosities and follow them through all manner of books. I was made for the library, not the classroom. The classroom was a jail of other people's interests. The library was open, unending, free. Slowly, I was discovering myself. The best parts of Malcolm pointed the way. Malcolm, always changing, always evolving toward some truth that was ultimately outside the boundaries of his life, of his body. I felt myself in motion, still directed toward the total possession of my body, but by some other route, which I could not before then have imagined. So in this excerpt, Coates really touches on this idea of education that we talked about in our last virtual meeting and whether schools really do foster education or not. So he talks about this theme of freedom again and how he feels bound by his ignorance. He says, bound by my ignorance, by the questions that I had not yet understood to be more than just means, by my lack of understanding, and by Howard itself. So this really speaks to the idea of finding freedom through education, and that often we are bound by what we don't know. If we don't know something, we can't act accordingly. And so he really speaks to this idea of finding freedom through knowledge and books. But he really separates this idea of knowledge and learning from the schools themselves. He says in the middle of the paragraph, but I could not match the means of knowing that came naturally to me with the expectations of professors. So this really speaks to the idea that he had that curiosity that we talked about last time. He wanted to know things and pursue his interests, but that didn't necessarily mix with the expectations that professors had, even at the college level. He goes on to say that he was made for the library and not the classroom, that the classroom was a jail of other people's interests. The library was open, unending, and free. So it's really interesting that he uses this idea of the classroom being a jail, kind of a metaphor here. We talked about in our last meeting this idea of the classroom being a jail in the sense that it was really set up just to manage behaviors. But here he takes that a step further and says it's a jail of other people's interests. So what he's really saying about the classroom is the curriculum itself, the things he's being taught, are what other people deem to be important. And that doesn't necessarily mean that he finds these things important. So he really feels kind of stifled by it. It's the opposite of freedom for him, because this idea of curiosity that comes up again and again is what he really feels should be the goal of education. And obviously, if he's not free to pursue his own interests, then the goal really hasn't been met. But he says that, in the library, he finds a sense of freedom because here he's able to pursue knowledge of exactly what he wants to know and not a prescribed curriculum that someone else is teaching him. So I really want you to relate this to the experience of reading his book in general. So think about whether or not you feel that you have found freedom in this book. Has it opened up new ideas for you or piqued interests or curiosities that you have that you didn't know before? Because I think ultimately that is his goal. But then he goes on to touch on this theme of his body again. And he talks about Malcolm X again, Malcolm always changing, always evolving towards some truth that was ultimately outside the boundaries of his life, of his body. And Coates says that he himself finds himself in motion, still directed towards the total possession of his body. So this idea of wanting to feel control over your body, if you possess your body, then you own it. It is yours. And so through books, he really found the means to own his own body because of the knowledge that he gained. So he says, but by some other route, which I could not before then have imagined. So he didn't imagine that he would find, this freedom in books and in the library and in knowledge. But he talks about, breaking down the boundaries of your life and your body. So meaning he really finds power in the knowledge that he finds outside of the physical world. So like these ideas and this knowledge that he finds in the library is what gives him this sense of ownership over himself. If you've heard the quote, knowledge is power, that's kind of what he's getting at here. The more you know, the more you can do. But overall, he doesn't feel as though the classroom really fosters this idea of curiosities. And he really drives that idea home in the middle of the paragraph when he says, the pursuit of knowing was freedom to me, the right to declare your own curiosities and follow them through all manner of books. So his idea of the perfect education would be the right to follow your own curiosities. So whatever you are interested in, whatever you want to know about, you should have, the facilitation to explore that. And he felt very stifled and imprisoned by schools because he didn't have the freedom to pursue his own interests. So it wasn't that he didn't want to read or that he didn't want to learn. It was simply that he wanted to be able to declare for himself what he wanted to pursue. And in a sense, that gave him a sense of freedom and control over his own body.